the hard parts, right? The compressors and seals, you know, things that are very specific to that machine. And since it's 20 years old, those parts are coming harder and harder to come by. Stephen, is that what you've yeah is that consistent with
Oh,
what you've
well,
been
from what
experiencing?
I've heard, Elliot Lewis has basically, reiterated that to me as well. So
Yeah.
what they've been trying to do, buy in advance for us. And there are some things here that the previous building engineer had collected. And so I have some backups here for whatever could possibly go wrong in the future. But, that you would have to have, on-site supply to just keep up with it and just buy in advance, is what I'm understanding.
Right. So it does seem like it's a good time to start planning for replacement, right? I understand based on the proposals that you had given to us, this is obviously a large cost item, and so waiting until you run out of parts doesn't seem like a good idea, and so you guys are ahead of the game now, at least planning for it, and hopefully you have enough of those hard to get parts in stock that you can keep things operational until you are able to get all those units replaced. And so the first question I think I was asked is, do these units need to be replaced? And so, the industry standard expected life cycle for a big package rooftop unit is that 20 to 25 years. These are about 20 years old, right? Are you going to get another 5 years out of them? Maybe, maybe not. But having a stockpile of parts certainly helps. And but having a plan for replacement is really the prudent thing to do.
I'll interject is just also in addition, besides being HVAC, if that is the situation, we should get on the table that, curbs, if we are replacing, their curbs are going to have to be redone for different size units. And the roof is 20 some years old as well. So that's also something that if we were considering this to take place, might be an active approach to basically facilitate the roof as well. So I'm just throwing that out there. It has nothing to do with HVAC in this conversation, but you can look at that as a big package item, when you're getting all this pricing together. So.
Sure. So my understanding is that, so what I saw was there was I'll call a structure built to accept these units. And since they are big custom packaged units, that I believe it's a direct replacement, right? The footprint of the unit today is the footprint of the replacement unit. And because there's the supplemental steel that these units sit on, I don't think that there's going to be extensive rework necessary, right? I think obviously there's going to be a little bit of work to, make sure that steel is not rusting and it's, has the paint on it and, all that good stuff, right? But based on what I saw, based on my, understanding is there's not a significant amount of rework needed to accept the new units. So that's good. Now, as far as the roofing discussion, that I think is something that is not in my wheelhouse, right? Age, condition of the roof, but agreed, right? Something worth considering. So moving beyond that, right? So the question was, do we need to plan for replacement of these units? To me, the answer to that is yes. And then so it's okay. Well, how does that actually get executed? And what else do we see, if anything, that should be considered? And so Stephen, we had seen the ballooning of the membrane when we stepped out onto the roof. Based on your observations, it seems to happen consistently early on in the day, and then later on in the day it doesn't happen, and again, kind of you reading in between the lines or reading the tea leaves, you think it has something to do with building pressurization and the first floor cafe area, which was operational at some point in time, right, in the past couple of years, has not been, and that makes a lot of sense to me. but not something that I could necessarily chase down and confirm when I was out there doing the general survey that I was doing. So that's
I'll follow up. Yeah. I have Siemens. I actually finally got a hold of Siemens, and I have them scheduled out here on Monday. I also have sent them a lot of my findings and finally got acknowledgement of my findings, and they said that they can work to control the building pressure as a temporary solution to a later fix. What I found in my schedules are that a lot of my exhaust fans in my building have been turned off. Also, my schedules, they kind of conflict with other schedules that are operating at the same exact time for the same rooftops. There's a lot of inputs being entered in the schedule over the past years, from 2005 to it looks like the latest is like 2017 for BET, or 2018. So I also, so that's a situation. I'll be working with Siemens over the next couple of weeks to try to alleviate at least the wear and tear that's occurring on a daily basis with the rooftops. Now, what I did do, I don't know if I mentioned this to you when you were out on site, the rooftop units, each one of the controllers at the units themselves were off by a timestamp of several hours, and that's each one. I have a timestamp, so I can revert this back to the original time, so we can start from scratch from the moment I stepped on the roof in the first place if we need to. But what I did by changing all the times on each one of those units to Eastern Standard with the unit downstairs with the computer here lined up, it's 12:16 p.m. Well, each one of those say 12:16 p.m. now, is that I push the deflection in the rooftop to farther in the day. So instead of it actually starting at 5:30 in the morning and ending around 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which would have been the normal situation within a fully occupied building with Essentia kitchen staff running the exhaust fan and any makeup air that they might have over there, I have pushed that now to it starts inflating around 7:30 in the morning and starts deflating around 4:30 in the afternoon. But what's interesting enough is that my schedule for my lights, and I happened to be here last night to be able to observe at 9 p.m., my schedule for my lights are not off. Nothing else is off inside my system. So this is truly becoming something that Siemens is going to probably have to go through here line by line and either eliminate or rebuild my schedule based upon conditions that exist in the building today. Because I have many zones that are either off or on, and the rooftop units are, I don't think they're communicating together in tandem. So, I mean, I have 37% return air damper open during the daytime shift, but I'm blowing in at, I'm almost at 85% open on air intake. So, I mean, these things are all going to have to be figured out, and the balancing. I found some books down in my office last night. I've got a balancing report from 2005. So at least Siemens, from being here in the building over the past couple of years, should have some trends, at least in their database of their own write-ups from being here doing preventive maintenance, that they might be able to revert back to and start taking line items out of my system. And I know we spoke about possibly, if they were to keep these rooftop units even a little bit longer, meaning BET and us, is there possibly accessories that we can add to monitor the building pressure inside the building, whether we are, negative 0.01 to 5 or, positive, which we would be able to read per floor almost. I mean, if you go to rooftop units, it would tell you each one, and you can see where it's serving. So I don't know if that's an accessory that, being that these things are already outdated and hard to find parts, that might be something that can be temporarily done in the meantime to kind of keep an eye on things.
So yeah, I think you're jumping ahead a little bit, so
I'm all over.
Yeah, so we'll get to that. Just to finish off our observations. Right, all 4 units are identical, 210 tons, package DX with 292 kW of electric heat, and then we did see a number of split system units on the roof, which to me means that there's load taken off the building, right? Whether it be data centers or just spot cooling for whatever reason. So again, I feel like we touched on the building automation part of it, so I'll skip over that. When we get to conclusions, right? We think that the that ballooning of the roof is due to an imbalance between supply and exhaust or building pressurization. We and so when we get to recommendations, I'll touch on what we think we can do about that. And then, the second thing that that we concluded is these units might be larger than they need to be. So if I think about when we do core and shell off the commercial office buildings, there's no tenant to design to at the very beginning. So what do? You do a skim load of the building. You then put in some very conservative values for equipment and outside air and whatever else, and you come up with some essentially square foot per ton. And so for a 20-year-old building, and I don't know if this is accurate, but when I did a little bit of research, it seems like the building square footage is 234,000 plus or minus, and with 840 tons, that comes out to about 275 square foot per ton. That's a lot of tonnage, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that typically, and I didn't say it here, but 350 square foot per ton is what I would have expected, meaning that instead of 840 tons, maybe it's down at 700 tons or 750 tons or something like that. And
I think, Derek, the history is probably such that, yes, obviously, so they had the full kitchen at one that was serving a big population, and I'm not going to call it data center type occupancy, but the main tenant that's here at one point in time, if not actually occupying, and this is prior to our ownership, was intending to occupy at a very high level because they also required the original development to provide 7 per 1,000 parking, which, similar to the HVAC, is an obscene number.
Okay.
So that might be the reason that they're as big as they are. And I mean, to your point, they're not, the building's not occupied at that kind of level today.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it'll ever be.
Yeah, and so Pete, what kind of
they do have some pretty dense plans, Sharon, for the 4th floor, right?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah.
They're in the process of downsizing and getting more dense in the space that they occupy.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that people who go in behind them on the other floors are going to be that dense necessarily.
Right, and so it's a very okay. So then jumping to
it's a little fluid.
Yeah, right. And so what I get is that we have to kind of play both sides, right? Just because something's a certain, and especially with what's been happening over the past couple of years, right? If we design the replacement to what's happening today, that's not right, because today isn't, with the way commercial office buildings are and how they're occupied today is not going to be how they're occupied in 5 years, or we can't say confidently that that's going to be how they're occupied in 5 years. And so what I am in the process of doing is so how do we determine what the right answer is? It's either A, you say, hey, we have 840 tons today, let's put back 840 tons, right? Or B, we say, hey, it's likely that we do not need all of that tonnage. Is there a way for us to feel confident that we can reduce the tonnage while still not being in a situation where we could have have less than we need? And so as an engineer, right, we try and get data to make these decisions. And so I've spoken with Siemens with this building automation system. I'm told that you have trending available, and so they are working on getting me some specific information from 2019, which I would consider to be the our base, right? Before the pandemic hits, and fan speed, compressor, things like that, to try and tell us just how hard these units were working, to see if my suspicion is accurate, or maybe they are using all that tonnage. Again, I'd be surprised if they are, but maybe they aren't, and maybe one of the units is, right. Maybe that southwest wing needs the full 210 tons, but maybe those two inner units that serve the more central part of the building, maybe those don't. And so it could be a combination of, downsizing a couple of units that we can and keeping a couple of units the same size. And so, that, in my mind, would do two things for you. A, it would reduce your investment in the replacement, which is obviously a good thing. And B, it would, I think, reduce your operating costs as well, just because you're getting equipment to operate in kind of a more efficient zone. So from a tonnage standpoint, right, that is what I essentially touch on here. And if for some reason the Siemens is not able to give us any data that we can interpret and feel confident in the findings, right? The second option would be, if you did want to explore this, right? The second option would be, well, hey, we know what your occupant load is today, or what it was in 2019 before everybody left. We know what your windows are. We know what your insulation is. We know all these things. And it's just a matter, it could be doing a building load calculation to confirm tonnage. Obviously, getting building automation is better and takes less time, but engaging somebody to do load calculations is something that's not outside the realm of reason. And again, if you talk about it like return on investment, right? If we find that you can reduce, by 50 tons, or just some amount each one of these units, there would be a payback on the cost of having somebody do those calculations. So that's the equipment capacity part of it. The other part of it, which Stephen touched on, was the building pressurization, right? And so, again, right, when we design buildings today, big commercial office buildings today with big package rooftop units, we always specify building pressurization controls, right? And that's done through a differential pressure sensor, which modulates supply, exhaust, and return all together to make sure you don't have, doors wanting to stay open because the building's overpressurized, so that we don't have the ballooning of the roof because the building's overpressurized. And those, in the grand scheme of the numbers that we're talking here for unit replacement, this building pressurization device, right? It's basically a sensor, a couple of tubes, and the programming associated with it. It's a very small amount of money as compared to the numbers that we're talking about unit replacement, right? So, and again, to me, if your building is overpressurized, that means you're bringing in too much or more outside air than you're exhausting. And if you're bringing in more outside air than you're exhausting, that means that you're conditioning more outside air than you need to. And that means that you're spending electricity that you otherwise would not need to, right? So again, looking at it from return on the investment, right? Spending some money to get this differential pressure sensor set up and programmed would allow you to better control outside air, or, reduce outside air, which would then allow you to take savings on the conditioning of that outside air. So I think there would be a significant payback, again, just with the tonnages that we're talking about, capacity that we're talking about. Along with that, and Stephen, you touched on it, that there's a balancing effort, which is, total air versus supply air versus return air versus exhaust air. And if the last one was done in 2005, right, I'm sure that there's been work within the building that has modified the your various VAV boxes or suites or whatever, and getting back to some sort of baseline, right? So, like when you replace the unit, to me, what we always want to do is we want to get airflows before we replace the unit, and then airflows again after, because one, there's a responsibility of the mechanical contractor to, at a minimum, give you what you had before. Let's say everything was working perfectly, and you hire one of these two contractors to replace the units. They take the old one off, put the new one on, hit the switch, start it up. They walk away from the job and say, okay, my job here is done, right? But if they didn't get the programming right, or get the CFM right, or outside air, or whatever, then they could just say, well, we gave you what you had before. Well, did you really, right? And again, it just comes back to supply air, exhaust air, outside air, and return air, and having a before and after can allow you as the owner to force them to say, this is what we had before, this is what I expect now. And it also gives us the opportunity, if there's any red flags with the before, then as part of the after, you can say, well, hey, we think that instead of whatever the number is, 8,000 CFM, we should be at more like 8,500 CFM, or whatever the numbers are. So there's kind of a data point that allows us to figure out whether or not something makes sense if you go through and get that balancing effort done before and after, and it lets you set up that differential that right now, like Stephen, you said, it's probably so screwy because it's had 15 years of somebody making a change that maybe was solving one problem but creating another. It kind of allows you to hit reset on at least that unit and what that unit is doing. And then finally, as purely a cost savings measure, right, demand control ventilation is something that is currently a code requirement in certain instances, but in this case, in a direct replacement, there's no code requirement, but it's a energy savings measure, which essentially says you're bringing in outside air to meet mechanical ventilation requirements. And historically or previously, right, when this building was built, the technology was not smart enough to know how much outside air you need. Today, the technology is smarter, right? And through putting a sensor in that measures carbon dioxide, you can have the system react and say, we can open, we need to open the outside air damper more because we've got a lot of people in the building and the carbon dioxide levels are higher than the base, or what I would expect on a day like today, right? When at least when I walked out there, it seemed like the occupancy of the building was low, and the outside air damper was open to 10%, which you probably could have gotten away with half of that. You probably could have done at 5%, still met the requirements of mechanical ventilation if you had some data that confirmed you were only at 400 parts per million or something like that. So again, right, this has nothing to do with being a requirement. It's simply something that we think could provide you a return on your investment, because the technology is not expensive, and if you've got a controls contractor already, if you have a mechanical contractor already in there doing the replacement, and if you have a controls contractor already in there doing the conversion, then you have them sitting at the table, and it's just adding some scope as opposed to paying them to mobilize, come out, and do all the work. You're just asking them to add a little piece to it. Any questions on those recommendations for the rooftop units?
Nope. I
Okay.
think pretty thorough.
Building automation, again, we touched on. I think we're okay there. Another thing I just figured I'd mention, right, is that PECO has rebates available for things like this. They vary between not worth it and and worth it. I expect that they may give you some money for the direct replacement, but they do kind of prorate it based on how old the equipment is. So it would, I think, be discounted if it was just, hey, we're going to replace our 210 ton with another 210 ton, and we're not going to incorporate, say, demand control ventilation. But where it could be a little bit more lucrative is if you go one of these other routes that says, like, hey, demand control ventilation, and while they'll give you more money, they also require more documentation. And so it kind of becomes finding what makes sense, right? And the only way to be able to do that is to call up PECO and say, hey, this is what we plan on doing. What are our options? And fortunately, I think some of it has minimal documentation required, supporting documentation required. But the things like demand control ventilation, they typically require like energy modeling and stuff like that, which ends up you need to pay somebody to do that, and then whatever you pay them has to get subtracted from the overall rebate. And so again, it becomes this kind of push-pull, and doesn't really make sense. And some of the times it's made sense, other times it has not made sense. But again, I just wanted you to be aware of the program, and that it could be something worth considering. So then finally, just the summary, trying to boil it down into one or two sentences, right? While replacement of the equipment in kind is a possibility, we recommend exploring the adjustments, enhancements listed above. So we believe that Elliott Lewis, and so kind of getting back to, I feel like I took a right turn on you with all of these other things, but I guess at its core, you had given me two proposals to review. I think I did provide under a separate email my feelings on those two proposals, but again, I tried to sum them up here. So Elliott Lewis's proposal is replacing with, I'll say, in-kind equipment, but the same manufacturer, right? Mammoth, who, I think all things considered, right, it seems like that equipment has done well for you aside from routine maintenance. And Elliott Lewis's proposal was very thorough on how they were planning on executing, the days, the times, what they were doing, what weren't they doing. And it was really kind of impressive, and it made me believe that this isn't their first time doing something like this, right? And in speaking with Mammoth's representative, who's Tozier trained, they say, yeah, this is in Elliott Lewis's wheelhouse. Tustin, we've worked with Tustin before on projects. I have not worked with them specifically on a big package rooftop unit replacement like this. There's nothing in that proposal that led me to believe that they're not capable of doing this work, right? It just didn't have that same level of attention to detail that Elliott Lewis's did. I do understand that there's a significant savings going to Tustin as opposed to Elliott Lewis. And so my only suggestion would be if you are considering Tustin, I think asking them for a schedule, right? It's like trying to get them to show you. So Elliott Lewis showed me that they know how this is going to happen. They know how to execute this. It's if Tustin, if you're thinking about going to Tustin, it's like saying, okay, guys, can you show me that you've got that same level of experience with this and can execute it? So it's asking them to provide a D-scope and then maybe some similar projects that they've done these big replacements on, just so again you can get a better feeling that you're in good hands. I've never heard of that equipment manufacturer, Airwise, that they're proposing. That's not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, right? It's just I'm not familiar with them, and so again, it's saying, hey, let me know where some of this other equipment is installed so that we have a level of comfort that it's not this very kind of rare unit that's only installed in northern Canada or something, you know what I mean? And that there aren't techs around to support it. And final sentence there is, listen, if your team is comfortable doing this and making the decision and getting them on board, it's completely fine. If you're looking for us to be a part of that process, then that's certainly fine. That's certainly fine as well. With the building automation system, again, right, just the one sentence summary is, again, I think they have the scope owns, they've got the training, they've got whatever they need. So I would expect, my recommendation would be go ahead and get those guys, engaged if you're comfortable with the cost and get that moving. And then from a miscellaneous standpoint, it's just, hey, if you want to explore the PICO incentives, you can explore them yourselves. We'd be happy to, make that connection and just kind of go in with the eyes wide open that, there is a possibility for some dollars there. It just may take, because of how much supporting documentation they require for some of their incentives, you may need to engage, somebody like us to help get them the information they need. So certainly something you don't have to do, but again, there might be a world in which that makes sense to get them engaged to get some money back. So I realize I was a lot to cover, probably a lot to digest. Does anybody have any questions?
No, I think it was pretty thorough, and I think at the end of the day, what we really needed, you provided. Because
Okay.
basically, we wanted to know if we needed to replace them, and if so, could we come back with something different? And then just the validation of the new BAS system, which you recommend we go ahead and do. And I think that's what the owners kind of wanted us to engage you for. And I think
Okay.
you've done a pretty thorough job of answering all of the things that we initially wanted. So I think we're good.
Okay. So yeah, I'm here if you need me.
Okay.
And unless you have any other questions?
Nope.
Yeah.
I
Thank-
think we're
Thank you,
good.
guys.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
All right. Well,
All right,
thank
guys.
you.
Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
All right.
All right. See you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Derek.